I'm Alex Klein, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Mr. Klein, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm very excited to have you here, and I appreciate the fact that you've flown all the way from Chicago here to New York to be on.
My pleasure.
Welcome. So actually, the first time that I was able to put a face to your name was through a Geico commercial. What was the story behind this? It was a while back, but I think I remember your oboe was in the background.
Yes.
And there you were. What's an oboe player doing on a Geico commercial?
I was at the Sunflower Music Festival in Topeka, Kansas. And we had a reception at some of the board members' farm or something. And on the way there, I had an accident and totaled the car. And Geico was my insurer at the time, and they did a very good job. And after I wrote them a thank you letter, explaining how important it was for them to bail me out so quickly because I was so far away from home. The next thing I hear, they asked me, when you put that in a commercial? Now, for the story, not because they knew me as an oboist or anything. So it's a true story.
Wow. Well, then what did they say once they figured out that you were, in fact, a famous oboist?
Well, I'm sure they do a study on the background of anybody they want to put on TV representing their product. So I think they just thought the more attention, the better.
So take me back to the beginning. You're from Brazil, and you started studying at the age of 9. But in fact, from what I understand, before you owned an oboe, and you were just playing on a reed.
Yes. The story begins when I was 8. And these days, I guess they give children drugs if they have difficulty concentrating in class. And school was very difficult for me, and I was very distracting to other kids. And you're going to have an interesting life when you're about to be expelled in 3rd grade. So my father intervened, talked to the principal, said, let's try something else. And then there was a music festival in town. And I went to see a concert, and I said, I want that one. And then we looked for a music school, but it's not you can find oboe teachers anywhere. And I started with recorder, and following year started oboe, but I didn't have the instrument. It would take another 6 months for me to get an instrument. So I would only take a reed home and do rhythm exercises or little melodies to get used to the reed. And on the lessons, I played on my teacher's oboe.
That's absolutely amazing. So you had to eventually adapt to the physicality of playing, and that was a separate, you could only practice that during the lesson, or how did that work?
In those 6 months, yes, I only played it once a week in my lesson. And so sorry for my neighbors, family, and the dogs in the neighborhood, but I only played my reed during the whole week at home.
Did music seem like a natural choice for you? Did you come from a musical family?
Somewhat. My parents' first date was in a symphony orchestra concert. By the time I was 11, I knew this was going to be it.
11?
Yeah.
So then you started winning all these competitions. What did that feel like to have that kind of success? And did you feel like this is, in fact, the route for success for an oboist, to do lots of competitions?
I don't think I looked at it that way. I don't think I looked at what is the route for success. I like doing this. I like what I get out of it, the satisfaction. I like the challenge. And when we go play concerts, people clap. You see what that does for an early teen, for their self-esteem. When my colleagues in school worried about zits and dating, I get hundreds of people clapping for my concert. So music very soon became a part of my identity, the way I saw myself.
Then as you progressed with your music education, did you start to get a sense of whether you wanted to become a soloist or a chamber musician or an orchestral player or somewhere in between? How did that start to sort itself out?
I was involved in everything music has to offer. I started conducting and oboe at the same time. I studied composition in college. I love chamber music. I love orchestra. And I love the solo repertoire for what it offers to me. Not so much as what I offer to it, but there is a personal satisfaction, a fulfillment, shall I say, when I experiment with various kinds of musical input in my life.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that you got into the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Was that a difficult audition process initially?
As I recall, there were about 130 people going for that position, which is normal for major orchestras. I don't know what hard would be. It was certainly a very demanding day. I played 5 times.
5 times?
For the final auditions. I played orchestral excerpts, Mozart concerto, Strauss concerto, sight reading, and chamber music. That chamber music with Daniel Barenboim playing at the piano. So,
wow.
Yeah, talk about, oh my God.
In fact, the audition process is something that we've not spoken about on this show before. I think a lot of people who are not in the classical music world can't imagine what this is involving. In preparing for an orchestral audition, is there a certain number of weeks ahead that you feel comfortable in reaching a peak at the time of the audition, or is that something that you can foresee?
I like to prepare with months in advance. In this case, however, the audition was on Monday morning. They called me on Thursday night.
My goodness.
I said, can you be here in a few days? Sure. I had to have the repertoire ready.
Do you think that, in fact, that was psychologically an advantage, that you didn't have too much time to worry about it, and you just said, this is the task, I'm going to go ahead with it with fewer expectations, because I really didn't have that much time to prepare?
It's hard not to have expectations when you audition for the Chicago Symphony, and as an invitee of Daniel Barenboim. And perhaps the red-eye flight from Seattle to Chicago helped me as well, because I was very tired when I arrived in Chicago and didn't have as much energy to feel so much nervous. But we are task-oriented at that point. We know what we got to do. Just go there and do it, and don't think any silly thoughts.
I have a lot of friends and colleagues who have to be on the audition circuit for a long time, a lot of times without success, despite being very talented or just getting the runner-up position. What advice do you have for these musicians who have gotten discouraged with a 2-year-long process, for example?
A lot of people, we can't generalize, right? But I see a lot of people having a product to sell. They play like this, and they're going to do their best at that and hope that the audition committee is going to like them. I would recommend them do some research. Not every orchestra and every conductor likes music to be played the same way. And they can listen to recordings of that orchestra, of that music director. They can understand who was there before. Did they like that person? Did they not like that person? And then we're flexible. We're musicians. We're artists. We can choose to phrase in a way that pleases the listener. We should do that, even as we try to be innovative. We should also please our audience. So with good research, they can probably zero in better in what of their best offerings can they bring to that audition and give a more educated performance.
In your experience, do most of these audition panels look for the same kinds of traits? Are they looking, for example, primarily for rhythm, intonation, and character, depending on what the instrument is?
I think those are basic things. If somebody has uneven rhythm, uneven pitch, and uneven style, don't bother taking the audition, no matter where we go. I would like to remind people taking auditions that whoever they choose is going to be their close colleague for the next 30 or 40 years. So they're not looking only for a good player, they're looking for somebody they can live with. Right? And that goes all the way to the way they dress, all the way to how fast they walk on stage, how they present themselves psychologically to the panel. You want to come across, of course, as somebody who plays very beautifully, very musically, and reliably, but also as a pleasant colleague. I remember once in an audition we had in the finals, I really liked that candidate, and I was about to vote for her. And she finished playing the amount of excerpts we wanted her to play, and I said, "Okay, thank you very much." And she felt that "thank you very much" was a dismissal, so she left in a huff. I liked her playing. I wanted to write yes, but I ended up writing no, because I don't care how well she plays. I don't want a persona like that in our section.
So these interpersonal relationships still continue probably within the orchestra after the hiring?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So tell me, does orchestral playing feel any different to you than, in terms of fulfillment, than, say, being a soloist or being a chamber musician?
Of course. It's not too different than chamber music, except that the chamber music group has gotten so large that somebody had the brilliant idea of putting somebody in front with a stick and sort of centralizing our actions. But orchestra is supposed to be a very large chamber music group. We listen, we adapt, and as an oboe player, I am one within 100 people on stage. I play a specific part of it. When I'm doing chamber music, I play more parts. And when I'm playing solo, I play everything. Sometimes in solo, I need to sound like a flute or like a violin. In the orchestra, most of the time, I sound only like an oboist.
So in fact, your being in the orchestra, has that influenced you or your sound in how you listen?
I think orchestra requires a different kind of sound, different kind of playing for all instrumentalists. And we have many people in the orchestra who also play as soloists of the orchestra or have a small solo career on the side.
Yeah.
And then we play differently there. Orchestra requires us, particularly woodwind players, to blend with other instruments that are different than us. So in a string quartet, every instrument is played pretty much with the same technology. And oboe is very different than flute. And even though there's a double reed player, also sounds very different than a bassoon. And then we have a single reed clarinet. And every now and then we have saxophones coming in. So we need to find a common denominator in between all of these players and find something that represents all of us. It takes some effort.
I'm curious to ask about your recording of the Richard Strauss Concerto, for which you won the Grammy. So what was the process like for recording this concerto, which has been recorded many times, and yours has become known as one which is surprising in its very slow tempo? Whose decision was that? Was that yours or the conductor's?
Well, I do not argue with Daniel Barenboim. I have great respect for him. I think he's one of the greatest musical minds, not only in our generation, but in many. And if he wants to do something in a certain way, I will certainly follow. Yet I do know that when Barenboim wants to make music with somebody, he likes to challenge. He likes the opposition. He likes when we struggle to find something in common, right? So maybe that was missing there, because I was all too happy to subdue to his vision, not only for that concerto, but for everything we did with him in the orchestra. But it has to be said that the Richard Strauss Oboe Concerto is difficult to fit in. We're talking 1949. The whole world that Richard Strauss lived in and grew up in and made a successful career in had disappeared, was bombed to ruins. Even his house was invaded at some point by the American soldiers, and that's when he met Sergeant John Delancey, and they talked about, okay, maybe you write me a concerto and we call it that, and eventually he did. So there is something about that piece. It was also written at the same time as the four last songs. They need to be understood together. The four last songs are more specific. They have the text talking about, now I go. I'm going this way and I see the storks going that way. That means life is that way, I'm going this way. And it's okay. And then death becomes a wonder, a discovery. At the same time, he was writing the Oboe Concerto, which had some thoughts about his early career. It's more 19th century, right, in its style. Harmonically, of course, it's still very much Strauss, but in its simplicity, it appears more to be early Richard Strauss. So why would that old man be at the same time thinking about his past and about his impending death? Right? So when we put all of that in the mix, we realize that the Oboe Concerto should be played in a more philosophical way. Not as a virtuosic showpiece for the oboe, but something that kind of tells, this is my life. It's more important than just showcase.
This leads me to another idea, which is, if it was such a stretch in tempo, but you were obviously convincing enough to have this recording and it won a Grammy, do you practice at home in different tempos to develop this comfort level as part of your process? Or in fact, do you usually just practice at one tempo, at speed perhaps, and then in that moment you had to use your musical instinct to just be convincing and follow along with Daniel Barenboim?
Well, let's make it very clear that playing an instrument is a task that we can teach a computer to do. Making music is a human activity. The art of music is about humanity. Our lives go in different rhythms every day. Maybe particularly more when we're artists and we have lives that don't conform to a routine. So I cannot imagine being honest if I practice at the same tempo every day, because I'll be fulfilling only the task. So yes, I practice in different tempos according to how I feel that day. And I have never performed the Strauss Concerto at that tempo before or after the recording. That was that moment. I still play somewhat on the slower side than everybody else, but not as slow as we did it in the recording. There was something about that day that just fit in like that.
In terms of your own learning process, do you place value in extremely slow practice?
No. I learned from focal dystonia that the way the brain absorbs information may make it prohibitive for us to play too slow.
So, 2002 was the Grammy. How soon after that did you start running into issues with focal dystonia? And I bring this up as a subject that we are just starting to explore a little bit more on this show, focal dystonia being a subject which previously probably was taboo for probably a lot of reasons in terms of young artists wanting to sustain their career, not wanting to scare off concert presenters, or perhaps implying to colleagues that there was something wrong with how they play, which is also maybe sometimes true. When did these symptoms first start surfacing, and did you know what was happening?
It was around the time I recorded the Strauss, around 98, 97, 98. But I didn't know it was focal dystonia. I started feeling some symptoms of my body adjusting to something. And there was an anxiety related to it. Only in 2001 did it get severe enough that required me to go see a doctor about something specific about my fingers, because I felt that my fingers were turning into the hand.
Which fingers did it affect?
3, 4, and 5, but mostly 3 and 4. Now, 5 kind of went along for the ride because 4 and 5 usually work together.
So, at some point you had to stop with the Chicago Symphony. What did that in fact feel like? Did you feel like your career was over?
Of course, I felt like my life was over. You see, Alice von Brenner was the doctor at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, and was a world expert in focal dystonia. I was happy when she told me I had focal dystonia.
And why is that?
Because I never heard of it. I think whatever it is, it can't be as bad as tendinitis. I was kind of thinking the worst thing you're gonna tell me that I have some kind of tendinitis. And she didn't, she said focal something. I can deal with it. Okay, at least I don't have to stop playing. Because with tendinitis, I would have to stop playing for a month or two and allow the arm to rest. And then she wasn't laughing. And she predicted that within about 3 years, I would quit the orchestra out of frustration. And I had to go into denial. I had to go and think, thank you, doctor, but I'm going to try something else. Because I cannot simply accept something like that. That's a sentence. Music, for us artists, is part of our identity. For me to stop playing is akin to suicide, because suddenly I don't exist anymore. So when I stopped playing in the orchestra, I was down to my last possible attempt to stay. Already by the year 2003, I was getting severe tendinitis every month and trying to compensate, force my fingers to do something that they didn't want to do. And I felt like a bad colleague. I felt like I was calling for the assistant principal to run down to the hall and play for me at the last minute. Sometimes he would drive to the hall and every red light, he had the music next to him. He was trying to see what he was getting into today, and go and run to the hall and play with the Chicago Symphony. And he did a beautiful job. But this cannot happen. Not at the Chicago Symphony. So I realized that I must leave, because I prized the Chicago Symphony too much. It was the zenith of my music career, and I had far too much respect for the institution, for my colleagues, and for Barenboim to remain in the orchestra and be an unreliable player. Right? So by about 2004, I played only 2-3 concerts with the orchestra. And midway through the year, I bailed out. And by that time, the secondary action of dystonia was taking its toll. Dystonia is not only about the 2 fingers or the parts of our body that are focally affected. It's about depression. Depression that comes from the destruction of our identity. Suddenly, I'm not Alex and I don't play the oboe. My name is Bob and I plant potatoes in Idaho. It's like, you wake up and you don't know which way is north. It's your entire life seems to have been a dream, a lie, a confusion, or somebody just told you about it, and it went months, perhaps years, sleeping only 2 hours a night because I couldn't sleep. I would collapse at 2 in the morning, and by 4, I was wide awake and walking like a zombie. I couldn't practice, I couldn't play, I couldn't do anything productive. And in my worst hours, yes, I considered a drastic move. Once saved by a colleague in the orchestra who noticed I was a little bit weird yesterday in rehearsal. So she called me to ask me if I'm okay. And I was writing my letter. And she immediately called a crisis center. And then I bawled and screamed at somebody for 2 hours. And from then on, it's like part of me really did die. I looked at my colleagues in the orchestra as if they were colleagues of my brother, like somebody that's one life detached. But that's all a process of reinventing, that we had to say goodbye to something that was. And enter a dark room where somebody's telling us keep walking, and we have no idea what we're going to find. So I literally became homeless and jobless and penniless. And I went back to my parents' home, and I slept on the couch for months.
How old were you?
I was 39.
That's absolutely amazing. You mentioned earlier that there was, of course, the inevitable anxiety surrounding this condition. There are a lot of theories about the rise of dystonia. Does your gut instinct tell you that perhaps this is related to stress? The reason I ask this is there seems to be a strong baseline of stress in the lives of classical musicians. I'm trying to explore whether this cumulative stress in your mind and in your feeling could have contributed to this.
Yeah, I've heard a theory, and very interesting, but I have seen so many more people that are more stressed than I am. Now, when I talk to Heinz Holliger, and when I see him playing, I sense much more going on in his mind than when I play. Yet he played, gazillions of notes in his career, never got anything like this. And likewise, I see many students getting focal dystonia who haven't even had a career yet and haven't had what we call musician stress of being on the spotlight, playing with top-level conductors and soloists, and now you have your solo. And for me, I confess you, music was a savior for me. Music was never really a task. Music straightened my life when attention deficit was challenging it. Music gave me focus, gave me discipline, and allowed me a marvelous life. I was always so friendly, I still am so friendly with music, that I cannot imagine it being stressful. I don't get nervous to go to concerts, I love it. When we play something for the first time, second time, maybe we get a little nervous because, we've never been in this situation before. But once we start playing 4 or 5 concerts a week with the Chicago Symphony, it takes a few months. You don't think about it anymore. You just go there, go on stage and play. It doesn't matter what it is, you just play. We get used to it. So I do not subscribe to the stress issue. I don't think it makes sense in my case. I really don't have an explanation other than, as you explained to me, we lose cells all the time, even neurons, and they are replaced. Our body constantly replaces our cells, but in this case, a neuron may have died in the pathway dealing with oboe playing. And even though the neuron itself can be replaced, the information that he had cannot. right? Or something to that regard. I'm not a neurologist, so I won't be able to sign off on any explanation in this regard. I'm sure they try to make it as easy as I need it to be to understand. I'm more practical when it comes to focal dystonia. I understand I have it, I accept that, and then it's about finding the right detour.
Is there any hope for all the people out there who are facing focal dystonia or any of the related conditions to get better enough to play? Obviously, you are an example, but I feel like there are a lot of people out there who don't feel like they will get any better.
I felt like that. And it is demoralizing when, okay, so I go to my parents' home. So I spend weeks on the couch watching TV, not being able to do anything productive. And then one day I feel better. You know what? Let me practice. And I practice for an hour. It feels great. And then I practice another hour. And the next day, I do the same thing. You know what? I think I can do this. 4 days later, I got tendinitis. It's just too painful. So my heart goes out to all the other musicians who get focal dystonia. Yes, I am playing again. Yes, I won the audition for the Chicago Symphony again. But yes, I've been in pain every single day of this season. And what we need to understand is that focal dystonia is incurable and is irreversible. It's there. Live with it. Accept it. It's a curve on the road and we can't undo it. Your career is never going to be what it was before. Your dreams that you had before are not going to be accomplished. That's it. Now, we do that turn on the road, that curve, and then we can dream again. And we can look into ourselves and see, what else am I good for? What other dreams, what other ideas do I always want to develop? So I always saw that part of focal dystonia as a godsend.
Wow.
Because it gave me the opportunity to experiment with things that I would never have done had I stayed in Chicago.
So, for example, to trace the trajectory of what happened after that, I can jump and cut to the chase and say that over a decade later, you were rehired to the same job. In the meantime, how did you fill your life with that void that surfaced? I know there was teaching. I know that there was conducting. What else was there in terms of your creative outlets?
What came to my mind is, what do I have that's still good? What do I have in my life that works and I can count on, that I can make a plan? Next year I'm going to have this performance. So I can do chamber music. I can do solos, recitals, not too many. Solo concertos, okay. Anything that doesn't go over an hour of playing. Of course, I can't play anything with only 1 hour of practice. I would have to practice 3 or 4 hours. So I would stop playing altogether, close the oboe case for weeks. And then 3 or 4 days before, I would practice all I need to do, play that function, and close the case again. So with oboe, that is reality. I did conducting. I always wanted to do that, and I had a wonderful time working with conducting. And more successfully is the work with the social orchestral things like El Sistemas, and the festival, the Santa Catarina Music Festival, which we began to put together in 2005, the year after I left Chicago, because I wanted to continue to live the Chicago Symphony that was inside of me, the way they organize things, the way they are so precise. I'm talking about management, about so precise about organizing things. You know, if we go on tour with Chicago Symphony, sometimes up to 200 people, I get my room key for the hotel faster than if I go traveling by myself. It's incredibly well organized, and all to make sure of one thing. When musicians go on stage, the only thing they think about is making music. So I created a music festival in Brazil that works on that we can have my students and teachers, friends from all over the world who were sympathetic with my plight and wanted to help us, and help me come out to Brazil and keep these kids here to practice. And I brought then to Brazil a little bit of a Chicago Symphony. We have a private institution. We're not government owned. It's a private institute with a board of trustees, and we fundraise, and it's an excellent board. All of the things that I learned in Chicago, I passed there. We have children's concerts, and actually we have 200 concerts in 2 weeks. It's a zoo.
That's astonishing. For those of our viewers who don't know what the symptoms are of focal dystonia, what do those look like?
There's no pain. This is brain located. So we don't feel anything for sometimes years. We just notice that the body begins to adapt. And eventually the adaptations end up showing more as we try to fight the disease, fight a ghost. Our body will react in certain ways, and then we can get tendinitis, or we can get all sorts of contorted things. But this is my relaxed hand. This is my relaxed hand. I relax this hand with 2 fingers curved in. I can extend them, but I'm applying power into them. They're not relaxed anymore. Right? So I begin playing from a tense position, like if somebody else was playing like this. It doesn't take a genius to see that this will end us in tendinitis or some other muscle or tendon issue, right? So that's why I limit how much I play, so I don't cross the line into tendinitis territory. I do have tendinitis right now, but it's not painful. We feel it. My therapists can feel it, that there's something there. It is inflamed, but not to the point that it hurts yet. So we have to always walk a very thin, tight rope.
Are you hopeful for your musical future? Do you foresee that you can continue to fulfill many rewarding projects? And are you looking forward to specific projects, in fact?
I'll tell you what. When I came back to Chicago, I made it very clear to Ricardo Muti, to the orchestra, to the patrons, to the media, that this is an attempt to return. Yes, I won the audition. Wonderful, and we make all of this noise, and it's good for people with focal dystonia to know that they can win the audition again. But I am putting myself in a situation that confronts that limitation of how much I can play. So I cannot then or now promise that I'm going to play in the orchestra forever. Of course I'd like that. Who wouldn't like to be Principal Oboist in the Chicago Symphony? It's a wonderful position. But I have never really put in my mind that this will be it. I cannot do that. I would like to play in the symphony a little bit more, and I would like to work on my legacy. And I'm 52. I play the oboe. It's not an old age friendly instrument. I cannot imagine myself playing much more after age 65 or so. Maybe teaching or playing a little bit, chamber music here and there, but on a regular basis, probably not. So I'm working now on my recordings, my priorities of repertoire that I want to do while I can still play it. And that sort of traces back how my career ran, right? All of the even things, crazy things that I played in my youth, but that I never recorded. I think it's time to do it now.
I understand that your instrument has some modifications
Yes.
to accommodate where you are right now in your condition. Was that complicated? Tell us just a little bit about the instrument.
I can get it.
Okay, yes, it would be nice to see that on camera.
Let me
Okay.
sit, let me get it now. So So, again, these two fingers are affected. I can put them, if I stretch them, they go in this direction. My middle finger is looking for the oboe about half an inch above it. At this moment, my brain is telling me that the third finger is touching the key. I can feel the key, but it is not touching.
That's amazing.
And the fourth finger is the opposite. I put my finger in it. It's like it thinks that the key is somewhere down in the bore of the instrument. So I tell it, raise, and it's telling me I'm already up. So I need to recalculate how this goes. And because of that, if I play in a regular oboe with everything in line, within 5 minutes I sound like a beginner. And my fingers just go all over the place. It's horrifying and very depressing when I go. I still remember situations like, anyway. So what I did is experiment with what's called a sensory trick. Focal dystonia is cruel in that it is task specific. It affects my oboe playing, but I can play oboe d'amore, I can play English horn, I can play Baroque oboe, not a problem.
Not a problem.
Not a problem, but I can't play the oboe. So of course I did ask a psychologist, now is this a love-hate relationship or something to the oboe? No, we never found anything. But what I did then is learn how to play oboe without playing oboe. For the brain, this means playing oboe. This is how the pathway identifies oboe playing. This is saxophone. The saxophone we play sideways a little bit. Flute sometimes as well, with an extended G key. So I have an extended G key with a coin. I tried many other bridges in the instrument, and I ended up only with this one. So not only I play a little bit to the side, but I am able to have more comfort in whatever this finger lands. And then it was a matter of getting used to this. And for many years now, for these 12 years that was out of the Chicago Symphony, I relearned how to play the oboe so that my finger automatically goes there. This way, the pathway in the brain that deals with oboe does not recognize this. So I go around the broken pathway. Somewhat. I can play more, but I'm not like the way I used to be.
My final question for you is this. Have you reached a point in your life where you are prepared to accept whatever comes in moving forward?
The hard way, yes. This is not a simple philosophical conclusion. This is a painful, anxious conclusion that comes out of tears. I never cried as much as I cried in the years after my diagnosis. And I have no choice but to accept that it is this way. And now philosophy begins. And we'll say, okay, that is past. What do we have to do to the future? But I'm not about to simply begin philosophy in the day of the diagnosis and say, I can't play the oboe. Okay, fine, I'm going to do something else. That can't happen. It doesn't work like that.
Mr. Klein, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to hear your stories and to have a little bit of insight into your journey. And I wish you wellness and fulfilling musical and life experiences.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Yes.